Welcome to this week's blog. There's a lot of stuff going on in D.C., a lot of political stuff happening. The whole debt ceiling thing, that just got bumped down to January. We're just getting over the government shutdown. You got Obamacare. Do you fund it or not fund it? When you listen to the politicians, they're accusing each other of being defiant. They're accusing each other of being in rebellion. There's just a spirit in D.C. that I kind of want to talk about this week. Is it a matter of being right or wrong? Is it a matter of whose opinion is right or whose opinion is best? Let me take a different approach to what's being said and what's being done in D.C. How does Washington, D.C. communicate its beliefs, and how does D.C. communicate its values? When you look at corporations, they have logos, and they spend millions of dollars to get the logo just right. So the logo will tell the audience what their values and their belief system are. In D.C., you don't have logos, but you do have statues. What do these statues represent? What's the background to them? Do they represent the values and the purpose and the meaning of Washington, D.C.? Now, this week's blog, I'm going to mention a lot of names. I'm going to give you a lot of background. It's going to go pretty fast. So here's what I need you to do. With this blog, we're going to give you a link. Go to the link, and that will bring up an article that I put together that will show you pictures of the statues I'm talking about, the history. If you just listen to the blog, you're going to get lost. So I want to go slow. I want to explain it to you, but I want to give you a reason I think we have rebellion and defiance and just that spirit that we have in D.C. Do you realize before Lady Liberty was Lady Liberty, that she was known as Athena? Well, who is Athena? The roots of this goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. And you may ask, well, what does Genesis have to do with Washington, D.C.? Well, it goes back to Babylon. In the book of Genesis, in chapter 10, where we have a person named Nimrod. In fact, the first time the word kingdom is used in Genesis chapter 10. This Babylon spirit, this Babylon culture that we have in D.C. goes all the way back to Genesis 10 and Nimrod. His kingdom becomes what's known as Babylon. The Tower of Babel, he's responsible for that. False religion gets its birth right there in Genesis 10 in Babylon, and Nimrod is the father of that. The false religion and the whole idea of what that represents, it's an anti-God, an anti-Christ spirit, and that spirit is still alive. So let's talk about the statues, the history of them, where they come from, because they're still very much prominent in Washington, D.C. In Nimrod, the founder of Babylon, he married, and his wife's name was Semiramis. Semiramis and Nimrod become the birth of false religion. Legend has it that Semiramis gave birth. She was conceived by a miracle and gave birth to a son named Tammuz. Now, Tammuz is to become the savior of his people in Babylon. Well, that says, people say by legend, that fulfills the promise that God made to Eve in Genesis chapter 3. Well, obviously that's false religion. Now, both Ezekiel and Jeremiah speak about Semiramis, they call her the Queen of Heaven, and they speak about Tammuz by name. Again, go to the link on this blog, and those verses will come up and with the pictures. Now, Queen Semiramis, the Queen of Heaven, when she was deified, when she was made into a goddess, her name changed. She became known as Ishtar. And Ishtar was the goddess of Babylon. Ishtar of Babylon later on becomes Ashura. Ashura is in the Bible. She's the one that Jezebel worshipped. Now, Ishtar is also known as the goddess of fertility. She's known as the goddess of desire. She's known as the goddess of freedom, which sits on our U.S. Capitol today. She's known as a goddess of liberty, which is in New York City. She's the goddess of war. She's the moon goddess. She's also known as the planet goddess Venus. All that goes back to Ishtar, which is Semiramis in a deity form, in a goddess form. So again, I'm going to start throwing names at you, but there will be pictures, and this will walk you through if you click on the link and go to interpretingthetimes.com. Interpretingthetimes.com, the link will be there, and you'll be all set. In Egypt, Ishtar is known as Isis. In Greece, Ishtar is known as Artemis. You have the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In Rome, Ishtar is known as Diana. And later on in Greece, she's known as Athena. That's where we get Lady Liberty and Lady Freedom. They used to be known as Athena. Later in Rome, Athena is known as Minerva. Also later in Rome, Athena is known as Juno. Juno becomes Libertarius, which is Lady Liberty, our modern-day Statue of Liberty. So I know it's a lot of names, and to follow that, Egypt, Greece, Rome, they all had different names, but it's the same goddess, and the point is, it's the same spirit. Today we have defiance and rebellion in Washington. It's that same anti-God spirit, that spirit of Babylon that goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 10 and Nimrod. Now, the goddess of freedom and liberty and the goddess of war is what we're talking about with Lady Liberty. She also became known as the goddess Columbia. Now, that's the symbol for the motion pictures, for movies in Hollywood. So Hollywood has also this anti-God spirit about it. You know, as nations transitioned, what happened was they transitioned to different nations, but the gods and goddesses stayed the same. I will go more into the male gods on the form that you look at, the paperwork that you look at, and we'll talk about the sacred pillars. In the Bible, you had Josiah tearing down the pillars. Well, these pillars still stand strong on the U.S. Supreme Court, on the New York Stock Exchange. You know, we still represent these things. In fact, at the U.S. Capitol, our own U.S. Capitol right now, on the top of the building sits Lady Freedom, which goes back to Ishtar, which goes back to Semiramis. Also, on the west entrance of the U.S. Capitol is a statue of Minerva. And with Minerva, she has a pillar which is broken in half, and on that pillar is a snake wrapped around it. And again, if you click on the link, you'll see pictures of this, and it will be explained to you in more detail. But the pillar and the snake, the broken pillar and the snake, is a memorial to Nimrod and Tammuz. And it goes right back there. So on our U.S. Capitol, we have a statue of Minerva with a memorial to Nimrod and Tammuz right there on the entrance of the U.S. Capitol. And on the top of the building, of course, we have Lady Freedom, which goes back to false religion. So when you say, what in the world is going on in D.C.? What's happening? The government shut down, Obamacare kicking in, do we fund it, do we not? By January, we're going to be talking about the debts thing again. What's going on? That rebellion, that defiance, just that whole anti-God, anti-Christ spirit, that spirit of Babylon is alive and well in Washington, D.C. And the roots of it goes back to the statues which represent the false religion, Nimrod, his wife, in Genesis chapter 10. Have a great time. Click on the link, read the article, look at the pictures, and understand what our nation capital is using to promote its values and its priorities. God bless you.